Welcome to another episode of Software Explorations, Concept and Overviews, hosted by your truly tech coach Ralph, where we are, as always, engineered to win. In today's episode of Software Explorations, we are going to be talking about the Story Refinement Scrum meeting. It's a very, very important meeting in Scrum because it helps us prepare for going into our sprint planning and then eventually into the sprint. We're going to talk about what goes on in the sprint in the story refinement meeting today so that we can be adequately prepared for as we embark on our sprint meetings and the actual sprint to work on stories and work as a team, work as a unit, all of that good stuff. All right. But before we do that, do me a big favor. Like the video, share the video, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell so you can know every time that we go live and drop new content, as well as go to techcoachralph.dev. You can sign up over there for free. You get access to exclusive content that you will not find anywhere else on the internet. How I work with my tech barbarians, doing sprint reviews, doing the whole Scrum night where we do our sprint review. We do the sprint retrospective. We had a video about that recently. We look back on the previous sprint so we can prepare to work better in our next sprint, as well as our sprint planning, where we actually go into deciding on the stories that we're going to be working on for the next sprint. I upload that. I share all that with you so you can see how we do it. And if you want to level up your tech skills and you want to work with me one-on-one, you also can sign up for one-on-one coaching with me, as well as get to work on some projects to build some real world experience. Because one of the things that many people are lacking in the field as they try to transition is actual real world experience. Let me help you build that. All right. With that being said, we are going to get started with our show today. Let's get to it. So like I said, we are going to be talking about the story refinements meeting. We're going to be crafting clear, actionable stories for agile success. And we all want to be successful. So follow along. This is the story refinement meeting. What goes on in there? We're going to talk about all of that. All right. So our agenda for today. What is story refinement? Why is it important? Who is involved in story refinement? When does this meeting actually take place? The process of refining stories, breaking down stories, refining the acceptance criteria, how to estimate story points, and I'll probably do a in-depth video on that on its own because that's its own thing. Refinement challenges, and then we're going to wrap it up with a conclusion. But I might have a bonus in there for you towards the end, so you want to stick around and find out. All right. So let's get to it. So what is story refinement? Part of story refinement is clarifying requirements, estimating and prioritizing work, improving sprint readiness. So clarifying requirements. Story refinements, or backlog grooming, that's what it used to be called, but now it's called story refinement, involves breaking down user stories to ensure the team fully understands the scope of the work, the requirements, and the acceptance criteria to reduce ambiguity. What happens, and I don't know if you heard this story from me before, but when I first started working in the Agile methodology, I was working at a company, like first time I'm in Agile, and we had a team of developers that were they were in another country. I'm here. I'm in the office, and the product owner wrote a story, and here's what happened. I saw it one way. The product owner saw it another way. The software engineer saw it another way, and I was more on the side of seeing it how the product, of how the software engineers were seeing it. But towards the end of the sprint, I'm like, you know what? Something isn't clicking here. So I asked the product owner, "Hey, did you mean this story to work like this?" And he was like, "Yeah, that's exactly what I meant." And I told him, I don't think that's what the developers understood, and that's definitely not what I understood. And now we were like, oh well, and I spoke to the developers like, well, this is what we understood. We're gonna go through with this, and now we're going to have to work on it the next sprint. Now here's why that's a problem, because time is money. We spent 2 weeks working on the wrong thing because the story was not clear, and that ends up wasting company resources, So, and then we had to go and rework it. So 2 weeks wasted. So that's why it is so important in the story refinement meeting that we that the whole entire team fully understands the scope, the requirements, and the acceptance criteria. And that's where you get to ask questions. You get to make very, very clear what what we are expecting out of this story. I'm a very big person on the acceptance criteria, especially in QA, because one of the most important things for QA is acceptance criteria. What should this story accomplish? And I like to have my acceptance criteria saying, the application should be able to do A. The application should be able to do B. The application should be able to do C. The application should not be able to do D, E, and F. Get it very, very clear. So now everyone who's working on it knows exactly what the expectations are. It is so important to have a clear story, clarifying the requirements. Estimating and prioritizing work. So teams assign story points or effort estimates to each story and adjust priorities to align with business goals and sprint clarity. So a big part of this, and if you are in the Patreon at techcoachrob.dev, and you've seen us full Scrum Night, towards the end of the Scrum Night, that's when we do our sprint planning, and you'll see us doing some estimates for the level of effort it takes to work on a particular story. It's not the amount of time that it takes, but it's the level of effort. And based on the estimates, once we go into sprint planning, we see, okay, what's our velocity, what's our capacity, and now we put the points that are going to be close to that, or maybe sometimes a little bit above it. But but now in the story refinement, that's where we are actually pointing our stories, estimating the level of effort, so that we can see, okay, this is the most important story. It's 5 points, 8 points, and we're going to take these 3 stories, we're going to put into the sprint, and that's what we're going to be working on. But we need to be able to estimate them during the story refinement meeting. Improving sprint readiness. Refined stories become ready for the sprint with well-defined tasks, dependencies identified, and smaller actionable user stories when needed. So we're going to get into breaking down stories later on, but improving sprint readiness. Having clear stories, clarified stories, having estimated stories, that helps us become ready for our sprint. And now we know exactly what needs to be done. We know if a story is blocked by another story or by another team or whatever the case may be, what do we need to do? Like maybe a story is blocked and we cannot pull it into the next sprint. Or it's very important that we need to. So now we go and we talk to whoever is the blocker so that we can get that resolved and we move forward. So the importance of refinement. It prevents last minute surprises, and those are the total absolute worst. Last minute surprises. Like you'll actually start a sprint and you start working on the story and like, oh, actually we can't do it because this thing, we don't have this infrastructure, we don't have this account, we don't have whatever the case may be. It is a nightmare. Next up, enhance sprint efficiency. It allows us to go very, very smoothly throughout the sprint. It encourages, and then it also encourages collaboration because everyone is in a room, whether it's on a virtual room such as a Zoom call or a huddle or a Teams call, where we are all working together. We have the Jira board. We have maybe a tool like Parable, and we are asking each other's questions. We're asking questions. We're answering questions. We're getting clarifying statements. All of that good stuff. It's so important. All right. So who in the world is involved in this story refinement meeting? The product owner, of course, because they're the ones who own the product. They provide clarity on the business requirements, ensure stories align with the product goals, and prioritizing the backlog. So the product owner owns the backlog, and they're saying, okay, this is what we need to work on. This is higher priority. Let's move this up. Here is the story that we need to accomplish for the business, and then we take that into refinement. We add more points to it. We add sometimes they start off with some acceptance criteria, and then we make the acceptance criteria clearer, so that we can all be on the same page. The development team is in there. They participate to understand the scope, assess the technical feasibility, break stories into tasks, and provide effort estimates. So part of the development team, right? Because we say development team, you think that's just, it's just the software engineers. No. The development team includes the QA engineers, the software engineers. It can include the DevOps engineers. It can even include the cybersecurity folks, right? Because based on what the story is doing, because the cybersecurity is there to assess risk, the DevOps needs to know, okay, what do they need to do to get ready for deployment? They might not be at all the meetings, but a lot of time, like definitely the QA engineers and the software engineers have to be there, because the software engineers can ask like particular design type things, like what is it they're looking at. And then the QA engineers, they can identify what are the testing requirements. They help clarify the acceptance criteria. Are there any risks as well, right? The Scrum Master, it says optional, but 90% of the time you're going to have the Scrum Master there, because the Scrum Master, like, bless their heart, right? They facilitate the sprint refinement, the story refinement. I keep saying sprint, the story refinement, to ensure that it stays focused and productive. A lot of times, us developers, we can end up going down these rabbit holes of trying to figure out implementation details. We should not discuss implementation details during story refinement. Is to understand what we need to do, not how to actually do it. And sometimes you see the Scrum Master will see us veering off, and they'll just take that hook and bring us back in and say, all right, let's put a clock on this. Let's put a clock. Let's time box this. And if you start to talk about implementation details, no soup for you. All right, no soup for you. So, and then stakeholders, I'd say occasionally, it's rare. I can't really call, if ever, I've seen stakeholders inside of these story refinements, right? But they can provide additional context or input when specific expertise is required for certain stories. Like I said, it's very, very rare. So when do we actually do these meetings? It's actually an ongoing process. I've been in story refinements where we have a meeting once a week, sometimes twice a week, usually about an hour to an hour and a half. It happens continuously throughout the sprint to keep the backlog updated and ensure stories are ready for future sprints. The mid-sprint sessions, teams often schedule dedicated refinement sessions, typically mid-sprint, to prepare stories for the next sprint planning. So you typically are going to refine stories, but now mid-sprint, okay, these are the stories that we're probably going to be looking to bring in for our next sprint. So to be ready for the sprint planning. And then just in time before sprint planning, final refinements may occur shortly before sprint planning to address any last-minute questions or adjustments. I think this meeting is probably optional. It's not a 100% required, but as long as you're ready. And sometimes you can even cancel refinements if you are refined too far ahead, because you don't want to. Honestly, you don't really want to be refined more than maybe 3 sprints at the most ahead, because things change. And now you can have all these stories refined, and you can have points on there, and then like, oh, we actually have to have a change of direction. Maybe we got some feedback that we need to act on, and now those stories become not necessarily invalid, but they need to be updated. So try to, at 3 sprints at the most. Like, you don't want to go any further than 3 sprints, right? And that's why sometimes, like, if we are refined to 3 sprints, like, okay, we're gonna cancel this meeting, like the ongoing process, but maybe we'll do the mid-sprint check-in to start getting ready for the next sprint. And we might not need to do the just-in-time before sprint planning, but maybe we might, in case we have some additional things to clarify. So this is how we do it, right? This is how we do it. We review so when we're doing this meeting, we're going to be reviewing the backlog stories. It might be a developer who is leading a project effort. It could be the product owner who is saying, okay, this is the things that we need to work on. So the product owner sets the foundation, right? But we're going to review the story, see what's at the top of the backlog, and that's what we're typically going to be speaking about first. And then we're going to start going story by story. We're going to clarify those stories, like the acceptance criteria, make sure that the story makes sense. We have a clear definition of done, right? Because a lot of times we have acceptance criteria, but we don't know what it means to be done with a story, right? For example, you can have something shipped and deployed, and it's working, but the definition of done is actually we need to be capturing some statistics on how this is performing. So it's not done until you do that. And then splitting stories, I think we're going to talk about that, but splitting stories, if possible, because sometimes stories are way too big, and we make a lot of and now we take on a big task, and then we end up failing. So what is the smallest unit of value we can deliver to our stakeholders? And that's what should make a story. So we also analyze to see, like, a lot of times if a story is 8 or above, can we break this down a little bit smaller so that we can into smaller chunks? Then we go into estimating and prioritizing that's where we are pointing and saying this one is more important than that one. This one is actually urgent though. So, figuring that out, identifying dependencies and risks. What are potential issues that we can run into working on the story? Is there another story that's blocking it? Does the database need to be implemented before we can build the API? these are the things that we discuss. And then once all of that is said and done, we mark the story for ready. Once it shows ready on the backlog, it shows that it can be pulled into a sprint, either the next one or the one after that, whatever, whenever that happens. But we mark it as ready, so in order to be able to get to work on it. So breaking down stories, we were talking about that, breaking stories down. You're going to identify the key components. You're going to apply the invest criteria. We're going to talk about that. And then we're going to be using some different splitting techniques. So let's jump into each of those. Identifying key components. Break the story into smaller functional parts. For example, UI, backend, API integration, or subtasks that contribute to completing the entire story. So you can have stories where, all right, I'm working on, for example, we're working on microservices, right? If you join us on Thursday nights when we're building the Urban Dictionary of Economic Data, we worked on the microservice for the API, right? So now we can interact with the API. After that, we built the front end using React, and then we had the two connect to each other. The front end connecting to the API. The API connects to the database, so we can have breaking the stories into smaller pieces. You can have a story for like setting up the database, and then you can have one for creating the database schema, creating some methods, some endpoints for like being able to create an entry, retrieve a list of entries or all the entries, retrieve one particular entry and so forth. And then you have, all right, let's build the front end. We have to make it connect. We have to implement the UI UX design of it. And then let's say, how do we connect it to the API and then have that render on the page, right? So many different ways you can break them down, right? So focus on vertical slices of functionality that deliver end-to-end value rather than just technical layers. So like just the front end, right? So for example, you could do, we set up the API, right? And now we're going to set up, we want to be able to retrieve quotes on the front end or whatever, right? Words or definitions, whatever. So we say, all right, I'm going to build the post endpoint and the get endpoint so that on the front end, when I go to a page of like words, it's going to list me all those. So that's going to be using the get method. So it's just so many different ways to do it, but you don't want to just focus on one particular thing. You could build the API on its own because API for a microservice, APIs is its own application. But then you can say, all right, I'm going to implement on the front end, making a call to the API that's going to list all like whatever it is I want to list, right? That is a vertical functionality because the API already exists. Now I'm going to be building, I'm not just building the front end, but I'm building the front end to connect to the back end, to the API to list me information. Apply the invest criteria. Ensure each new story is independent, negotiable, valuable, estimatable, small, and testable. Very, very important because you don't want a story, like you don't want to say, I'm working on this story, but I can't close this story unless this other story is worked on. See, it doesn't work that way. The story has to be negotiable to say, all right, we can do this, but we won't do this part. What is the full value of the story? It has to be valuable. What value does this story bring to the stakeholders? If it does not bring any value, then it's not worth doing it. All right? Don't do anything that doesn't bring value. Estimatable. So we should be able to say, okay, based on the what the story says, the level of effort is, and then you put that level of effort, right? Has to be small. You don't want no huge giant, like you're not gonna say, oh, I'm just gonna build the whole thing in one story. It doesn't work that way. And it has to be testable. How can we make sure this works? Are we able to use the acceptance criteria to build out our test case? And okay, this is exactly, this is the checklist that needs to pass for us to know that this is functional, right? So for example, if a feature feels too broad, split it by user flows or acceptance criteria. For example, user registration into collect user information and send verification email, right? That's a great example. And then lastly, use splitting techniques. So some different splitting techniques. Workflow-based splits break stories into distinct steps in the process. For example, search function, search by keyword, and filter search results. You can split stories by role. If multiple user roles interact with a feature, split stories based on the role. So admin dashboard, user dashboard. So as an admin, when I log in, I want to see the admin dashboard showing me whatever. As a user, when I log in, I want to see the user dashboard showing me whatever, right? And then there's complexity-based split. Separate out risky or technically challenging components that need additional focus. For example, implement login with OAuth, all right? Next up, acceptance criteria. Ensure clarity and precision. Align business and user needs and make criteria testable. I can't emphasize on this. It has to be testable, because if it's not, how the hell do you know if it works or not? Come on, man. So ensure clarity and precision. Rewrite acceptance criteria to be specific, measurable, and unambiguous. You shouldn't be like, huh? I don't know what that means. No. Instead of the page should load quickly, use the page should load within 2 seconds on a 4G connection. Make sense? So there we know exactly what we're measuring for, instead of the whole ambiguous, because my quickly is definitely different than Mitch's quickly, which is definitely different than my friend, the King Tech quickly himself, your car's quickly, right? So that's why we want to be very, very specific. The page should load within 2 seconds on a 4G connection. Use simple, concise language that both technical and non-technical stakeholders can understand. One of my biggest rules, especially like a lot of times, like, and I've noticed this, right? The more experience that you get, the less technical jargon you try to use. A lot of times I'll meet somebody and they're like, and they use all these complex words that doesn't mean anything. I'm like, what the hell are you saying? Just get straight to the point. Simple, concise. The page should load within 2 seconds on a 4G connection. I don't need you to say the DOM of the HTML page should load within 2,000 milliseconds. Yada yada yada. No, just keep it clean. Keep it clean, right? Anybody who reads it should be able to understand it. All right. Business and user needs. Confirm that the criteria reflect the user's intent or business value. For example, ensuring a search function returns relevant results, not just any results. What is the purpose of the story that we're building? What do the users need? And let's go deliver that for them. Incorporate any edge cases or non-functional requirements. For example, forms should work on mobile and desktop browsers. See, that's not necessarily a functional requirement. It's specifying where and on what platforms it should work. You know, so definitely important. And then make the criteria testable. Frame acceptance criteria as testable conditions to ensure the feature's success is measurable. Use given when then. If you guys remember when we spoke about behavior-driven development, use given when then scenarios, behavior-driven development, right? For clarity. Given the user is on the login page, when they enter valid credentials or click login, they should be redirected to the dashboard. That's one way of doing it. I also like to use just a sentence that says the user should be redirected to the dashboard. The dashboard should load within 2 seconds on a 4G connection. The dashboard should have these tiles, whatever tiles you want, these metrics, whatever metrics you want, but it should be like it should just say exactly what is the expectations. And now the testers, the QA engineers, they can go and write test cases to satisfy those like that testable criteria. Estimation techniques. All right. So part of estimation, part of story refinement, you need to estimate what's the level of effort on these stories. So we have planning poker, we have t-shirt sizing, we have the bucket system. I'm not too familiar with that one. Affinity estimates and dot voting. So I'm definitely familiar with the first two. I'm not too familiar with the last three, but we'll find out more about them. So planning poker. Each team member privately selects a story point value, for example, from the Fibonacci sequence, which I did upload a video to techcoachdrive.dev where I was breaking down how to use a Fibonacci sequence, what the numbers mean, why. That was my first Scrum night that I did with the Tech Barbarians. It is in the Patreon. You can see how to do that. Really, really good video. Everyone reveals their estimates simultaneously, followed by a discussion to align on a consensus value. So if you are in person, if you're working in person as a team, you can actually have those cards, right? And And then now, like on 3, 1, 2, 3, everybody flips the card to show the value. Now, a lot of these things are done remote. There are websites where you can do planning poker. There are Slack bot plugins where you can do planning poker. There's so many different tools, right? But it's really, really important that people estimate. And then now, if somebody estimates a 8 and somebody estimates a 3, now you ask, okay, so why did you think it was an 8? Why did you think it was a 3? And now you try to understand where everybody is coming from. And then now you try to meet and like you try to find some type of consensus on that. T-shirt sizing. Stories are categorized into relative size like small, medium, large, or extra large. Useful when precise estimates aren't necessary, providing a high-level comparison of effort, right? So that's where I've used it, where we might say, okay, we have this big initiative to do. We haven't broken down the story. Like let's say we have an epic, right? We haven't broken down the stories into like the individual stories that make up that epic. By the way, the epic is like a parent story that houses like smaller stories. But we might give a teacher say, oh, like the level of effort of this is like a medium per se. It's not extra. It's not going to take us like an egregious amount of time, but it's, so it might take us like a few sprints, But yeah, so it's useful when the precise estimates aren't possible. Like we're not actually pointing a particular story. So that's when you would probably go into t-shirt sizing. The bucket system. Stories are placed into buckets or ranges of stories, points 1 to 2, 3 to 5, 8 to 13. Okay, I am familiar with that, right? The team collectively places each story into the most appropriate bucket for fostering quick alignment. So you say, okay, this story is pretty small. It's probably a 1 or a 2. Not like we don't have exactly, but this one is probably a 8. This one's probably a 5. Figuring it out that way. And in the affinity estimation, the team organizes stories by relative complexity or effort in line or board, starting with the smallest one. After adjustments and discussions, story points are assigned based on the final order. I am not familiar with this one whatsoever. I'm not familiar with it, but reading what I'm reading, I don't even like it. I'm just being honest, right? Don't at me. Don't at me if you're an affinity estimation fan. Dot voting. Team members distribute a set number of dots or votes across the stories they believe represent the appropriate effort. Stories received the most votes are assigned the corresponding point value after discussion. I don't like this one either. Just reading that, I don't like it. I'm a planning poker type of guy. I am a t-shirt estimating type of guy. I'm even the bucket system. I wouldn't mind the bucket. I'm not crazy about the bucket system, but the dot voting in the affinity, it's a no-go for me, all right? It's a no-go. So what are some challenges that we face in refinement? So what are some challenges we face in refinement, right? So the biggest challenge I would say is the lack of clarity in requirements. Like I told you the story earlier about the major fail that we had because the story, like the acceptance criteria just wasn't clear. And me being new to the Agile world, I didn't know what questions. I was even new to the software, so I didn't know what questions to ask. Now the developers got confused, the product owner got confused. It was just a big old mess, right? Scope creep and over refinement. Sometimes, like I said, and that's why the Scrum Masters are so important. They keep us focused. We can start going way into like some implementation details, which we should not be doing. And then there's scope creep where we just add on and on and on to like, oh, we can do this, we can do that. No, it might just be another story, right? Inconsistent participation. One of the biggest mistakes I think QA makes is they don't join these. They should, as a QA engineer, you should join every single Scrum meeting that there is, right? Because your voice matters. And one of the biggest problems is not being in these meetings. You're not participating. Your voice is not heard. You're not contributing. Like you're not helping clarifying the requirements and the acceptance criteria. So many things. So it's very, very important. And people who show up sometimes and don't show up sometimes, they lose track, right? And then we have difficulty in estimating complex work. So that is a challenge because it's so hard to get a lot of information or context. I think one of the things that you can do is do some research before getting into estimating it, or create a spike story to do the research. And then once you have the spike completed and you know the information that you did it before, then you can estimate that story that was complex, because at that point it's not as complex as you thought. And then time constraints you don't want to spend the whole afternoon in the meeting because we actually have work to do. We have software to develop, so those are some of the challenges that you can face in refinement. So what are some refinement tools? That's my gift to you, right? Some refinement tools. I use Parable all the time with the Tech Barbarians. We use that for Sprint Retrospective. We use it for planning poker, all of that stuff, right? So super important. There's the Jira Poker plugin. That it's a plugin for Jira where you can use that to do your estimations. And there's Scrumpy Planning Poker. I'm not too familiar with that one yet. I do want to check that out. Maybe we'll do that on a live stream at some point. And then there's Microsoft Teams, Slack, Zoom, as well as other tons of other tools. But Teams, Slack, Zoom. If you're a remote team, you can use that on the like you log in and you share your boards and all that, and you go from there. So that wraps that up. So in conclusion, we spoke about what in the world is refinement, why is it important, who participates in these story refinement meetings, when does the story refinement happen, what's the process, what's the steps that we go through, how to break down stories, refining the acceptance criteria, the estimation techniques, the refinement challenges, and I shared with you some refinement tools. If you have some additional tools that you use, please drop it in the comments for me because I would love to get them and then share them out as well. But that's it. If you have any feedback, any questions, please let me know. Drop me a comment. I will make sure to respond to you. But with that being said, we're going to get out of here. Let's go back to full screen. And I just want to thank you so much for tuning in. Hopefully you found this information super helpful and valuable. I just try to add value to you every single day. All right. On your way out, do me a big favor. Like the video, share the video, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell so you know every time that we go live and drop new content, as well as go to techcoachref.dev. Sign up today. You can sign up for free. And then if you want to get more information, if you want to work with me one-on-one, then you can upgrade your membership at that point. But it's free to sign up. I do have some free content up there that you will not find anywhere else. And there is nobody that can deliver this information the way that I deliver it. All right. So check it out, techcoachref.dev. Sign up for one-on-one coaching with me. Let's run it up. Spaces are limited though. Spaces are limited. We are almost full, right? But with that being said, I'm out of here. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your week. This is Tech Coach Ralph with another episode of Software Explorations. Concepts and overviews. We just finished talking about the story refinement process. This is Tech Coach Ralph. We are out.